On the edge of the Gulf of Guinea, in the mystical village of Assaye, people spoke in hushed tones about the sea, not just because it gave them fish or swallowed the occasional canoe, but because it listened. The elders believed the sea was alive, watching, waiting, and sometimes weeping. That night the waves crashed louder than usual, not in rage, but in grief. The moon hid behind thick clouds as fishermen abandoned their boats and children clung to their mothers. Chief Dolo, the village head, stood barefoot, on the shoreline, holding a calabash filled with palm oil. He poured it into the sea, a traditional plea for peace. Suddenly, the water split, not like a tide, but like a wound, and from it rose a young woman. Her skin shimmered like midnight rain. Her eyes were not white but ocean blue, and her hair dripped with seaweed and mystery. Atop her head sat a crown, not of gold or beads, but coral, glowing like embers beneath the surface. Silent, she stepped onto the sand. Gasps followed her steps. The women made the sign against evil. The men trembled. No one spoke until the child of the village drummer, a boy of 5, whispered, "She smells like Mama used to," before she went into the water. Then the stranger spoke, her voice both gentle and echoing. "My name is Ewomazino. I come from the water, and I bring a warning." The air shifted. Owls screeched. Somewhere in the forest, a masquerade's drum echoed without a player. And Assaye knew. Their fate had changed. The villagers stood frozen as Ewomazino walked further into Assaye. Her bare feet left no prints on the damp earth. Not even a drop of seawater trailed behind her, though she had emerged soaked. Her coral crown pulsed faintly as if breathing. The elders gathered quickly at the Ogba Umalokun, the sacred house of the sea spirits. The women wailed softly outside, sensing that their customs were being tested. Inside, Chief Dolo sat with the 6 eldest men and the high priestess, Mama Nyene, a blind woman whose eyes still saw what others could not. "She is no ordinary spirit," whispered one elder, clutching his staff. "No," said Mama Nyene, her milky eyes rolled to the ceiling. "She carries the scent of salt, yes, but also the cry of blood." Meanwhile, Ewomazino stood in the village square. Children peeked from behind doorways. The bravest among them, Ibiere, a girl of 12, approached her. "Are you a water spirit?" Ibiere asked, voice trembling. Ewomazino turned, her eyes softened. "I was once like you, human, but now I am both." From her waist, she pulled a cloth-wrapped bundle. She handed it to Ibiere. Inside was a seashell, large, red, and wet with a beating rhythm like a heart. "This is the Oko Omi, the heart shell. You must keep it safe." Before Ibiere could respond, the ground trembled faintly. The sound of distant drums, not played by human hands, rolled through the village. Then Ewomazino turned to the growing crowd. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade through calabash. "A king from beneath the sea is coming. He seeks vengeance for what this village did 30 years ago. If he arrives, none will survive the tide." Whispers flew like birds. What had they done 30 years ago? Suddenly, an old woman fainted. Another dropped her water pot. Mama Nyene emerged from the Ogba Umalokun and said one word, "Obe Bulu." Every elder gasped. Chief Dolo fell to his knees. The villagers would never forget that name, Obebulu, the banished water prince they had cursed in secret and imprisoned long ago in the forbidden cave by the shore. Now he had found a way back, and Ewomazino was his messenger, or his weapon. A thick fog settled over Assaye the next morning, the kind that made the sun look like a dying lantern. Crops bowed as though mourning, and even the goats refused to bleat. In the center of the village square, Chief Dolo summoned a gathering. All able-bodied villagers circled around the sacred drumstone as Mama Niene was carried forward by two girls. Her blind eyes scanned the air. "We must speak the truth," she said in a voice that shook the ground more than any thunderclap. "The girl who came from the sea is not only a warning, she is blood of our blood." Murmurs broke out. Chief Dolo stepped forward, shame clouding his usually stern face. 30 years ago, we cast a child into the sea." Gasps. He continued, voice heavy with regret. "My brother, Orugbani, loved a woman of the water. She bore him a daughter, but the elders feared her presence. They claimed she was an abomination, neither fish nor flesh." Mama Niene interrupted. "The woman of the sea was a princess of the Umalokan kingdom. When her daughter was taken and offered to the tide, the sea did not swallow her. It transformed her, protected her, trained her." All eyes turned toward Ewomazino, who stood silent and distant, staring into the sky as if listening to voices no one else could hear. "The crown of coral she wears," Mama Niene continued, "is not just a symbol. It is a right. She is heir to the Umalokan throne, and she bears the vengeance of a wounded mother and a banished prince." A boy cried out, "But what of Obebulu? What did we do to him?" This time it was Papa Ede, the oldest living man in Asei, who responded. His voice cracked like old wood. "Obebulu came ashore 30 years ago, demanding we return the girl. But the elders feared his power. They tricked him into the Cave of Chains, binding him with salt ropes and 7 sacred cowries." He wiped tears from his beard. "It was I who sealed the cave." The silence was thick with guilt. Ewomazino, finally, turned, her eyes brimming with something far older than sorrow. "The chains are weakening. He will rise on the next moontide. I have come to offer a choice: face him in war, or set him free and beg forgiveness." A young hunter shouted, "Why should we kneel before a prince of water?" Ewomazino stepped closer, her eyes glowing faintly now. "Because his rage is not just royal, it is ancient. If he rises in fury, he will not only drown Asei, but awaken the spirits of the sunken depths who have not walked the earth since the time of giants." The crowd fell silent. Chief Dolo gripped his staff. "Then tell us what must be done." Ewomazino pointed to the forbidden cave beyond the mangroves. "You must go to the cave, face what you buried, but only with the girl who holds the heart shell, the child who is innocent of your sins." All eyes turned to Ibiere, the 12-year-old girl clutching the glowing red shell. Her hands trembled. And so, the path was chosen, not by warriors or elders, but by a girl not yet old enough to braid her own hair, and a sea princess who never had a childhood. The next dawn came not with birdsong, but with silence. Even the sea hushed, a small party prepared. For the journey to the forbidden cave, Chief Dolo, Ibiere with the heart shell, Ewomazino as their guide, and 2 chosen elders. Mama Niene remained behind, chanting and scattering kola nut powder across the village boundary to shield it from restless spirits. Before they departed, the villagers gathered in a circle and poured water on the ground, a ritual plea for safe, accurate passage. Old women clutched charms. Young men whispered prayers to their ancestors. Ibiere wore a simple wrapper, but around her neck hung a string of teeth from sea animals, Ewomazino's gift. To keep the spirits of confusion away, Shiki said. As they entered the mangrove path, Ewomazino began to sing, low, ancient melodies that made the leaves rustle as though listening. The trees whispered secrets in forgotten tongues, and small crabs crawled out to watch the strange procession. After hours of silent walking, they reached a cliff edge. Beneath it was the gaping mouth of a cave, slick with moss and humming with Dark energy. Ewomazino turned. From this point, only Ibier and I may enter. Chief Dolo objected. She is a child. But Ewomazino's eyes glowed. Only the innocent and the chosen can unlock the curse. If anyone else steps foot inside, they will turn to salt. Terrified but determined, Ibier nodded. I'm ready. Together, the sea princess and the girl descended into the cave. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of old spells and ancient betrayal. Phosphorescent moss lit their path. Sea sounds echoed even though no water flowed within. At the cave's heart stood a giant statue of a merman bound in cowrie chains, his stone eyes weeping crimson. The heartshell in Ibier's hand began to pulse like a second heartbeat. Then a voice slithered from the walls, deep, regal, and broken. Who dares awaken Obebulu? The chains rattled. The air turned cold. Ibiere fell to her knees. Ewomazino raised her coral-crowned head. Brother, it is I. The cave shuddered. Stone cracked, and slowly, with a roar like a tidal wave breaking, Obebulu, the banished prince of the sea, stepped forward. He was no longer stone, but flesh, towering, muscular. His eyes were whirlpools of grief and wrath. You wear the coral crown, he said to Ewomazino. Does that mean our mother, is dead? Ewomazino nodded, tears sliding down her dark cheeks. She died weeping for you, for what they did to us. Obebulu knelt beside Ibier and touched the shell in her hand. You are brave, child, braver than the elders who condemned us. He looked toward the cave mouth. And what of Asei? Do they still hate what they do not understand? Ewomazino answered softly. They fear, but not all hate. This girl proves it. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then Obebulu did the unthinkable. He unwrapped a golden chain from his own wrist and handed it to Ibiere. Take this, a sign of peace. But tell your chief, the sea forgets nothing. Let him choose atonement or extinction. As they left the cave, the waves outside began to rise unnaturally. Even though the moon was not full, something else had awakened. The real test was still to come. When Ewomazino and Ibiere emerged from the cave of chains, the sky had darkened, prematurely. The sea beyond the mangroves had grown restless, its waves foaming with ancient fury, its surface reflecting shadows that moved without wind or sail. The others stood waiting. Chief Dolo rushed to them, his eyes widening when he saw the golden chain in Ibier's trembling hands. He fell to his knees. He lives, he whispered. Obebulu lives. Ewomazino nodded solemnly. He gave us this as a token of restraint, but he also gave us a message. You must choose. The return to Asei was tense. The village felt smaller now, like a basket woven with secrets ready to burst. That evening, all villagers gathered beneath the talking tree, a sacred iroko where ancestral decisions were made. Ibiere stood before them, holding the glowing heart-shell and the chain of peace. She recounted all that happened, the chains, the statue, the awakening, the prince. Mama Nyene, seated in her ritual white, declared, Obebulu has given us mercy where none was deserved. But we must complete the atonement before the next moonrise, or his mercy will turn to vengeance. An elder scoffed. What atonement will satisfy a sea prince? Ewomazino stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, yet powerful. You must return. What was stolen? Chief Dolo hesitated. What do you mean? Ewomazino lifted her hands. You took more than a child. You took a mother's right to grieve, a prince's honor, and the future of the Umalokan bloodline. Now you must give. Back, not just apologies, but a vow. She explained what was required, a ceremony of remembrance at the edge of the sea, with every villager in attendance to speak aloud the name they buried in silence. Ewomazino, a sacred naming stone, engraved and dropped into the ocean, recognizing Ewomazino as one of Ase's children, a vow of protection, led by the chief himself, promising that no child born of land and water would ever again be harmed. Murmurs spread. "But she's not one of us," muttered one. "Yet she came back to warn us," someone else countered. "She could have left us to drown." Ibiere, voice firm, stepped forward. "She's more than one of us. She's better than us." That night, while preparations began, the ocean began to surge. Huge waves crashed upon the shore, flooding the fishing huts. Fishermen's canoes broke from their moorings. A storm without rain began to swirl in the sky. Obebelu was watching. The next morning, just before dawn, the entire village stood by the water. Mama Nieni lit 7 palm oil lamps and invoked the spirits of both land and sea. The villagers, one by one, whispered Ewomazino, letting her name rise into the salt air. Then, with trembling hands, Chief Dolo dropped the carved naming stone into the sea. Ewomazino stepped into the water until it reached her knees. Her crown of coral glowed, brighter than ever. She turned and looked back at them. "The sea has heard you." Just then, the wind died down. The water stilled. The sky began to brighten, but it wasn't over. From the horizon, a great sea beast began to rise, horned, scaled, with eyes like burning shells. Obebelu had sent his final test. The village had asked for mercy. Now they would have to earn it. The sea trembled. From the depths emerged a creature that no elder had ever spoken of. Not in fables, not in nightmares. It had the tail of a whale, the horns of an antelope, and a chest that glowed with veins of molten coral. The air itself seemed to freeze. Children screamed. Women clutched their babies. Men readied spears, though they knew, deep in their bones, no weapon born of earth could kill what rose from the sea. Ewomazino stood unshaken. "It is not here to destroy," she said. "It is here to judge." The beast, called Ajulo Namiri, the sea's verdict, let out a roar so deep it shook mangoes. From the trees, the villagers fell to their knees. Suddenly, the beast opened its maw and released a flood of memories into the air, visions like mist, floating above their heads. A crying baby with coral in her hair, abandoned on the rocks, Obebelu roaring, his fists pounding against the cave of chains. The villagers watching, afraid, as the ocean took the child they deemed unclean. Each vision stabbed like a knife of truth. Grown men wept openly. Even Chief Dolo buried his face in the sand. Ibiere stepped forward, small yet unflinching. She lifted the heart shell, and it began to hum. The beast stopped. Ejulon Miri lowered its massive head toward the girl, allowing her to touch the center of its brow. The moment her tiny hand made contact, the storm clouds scattered. The sea shimmered gold. Then Obebulu's voice echoed, not from the sky, but from inside the hearts of every villager. "She has chosen forgiveness. So I shall too. But let this be written in soul and stone. Betrayal may be forgiven, but never forgotten." The sea beast slowly dissolved into mist, leaving behind only a small silver scale, the size of a child's palm. Ewomazino picked it up and turned to the villagers. "Your village has been spared. Not by might, but by truth and courage." Mama Nieni stepped forward and held both Ewomazino and Ibiere in her arms. "From today, we return you to us, not as a curse, but as a crown." That night, Ase held a great festival. There was no dancing at first, only quiet singing and shared meals. Forgiveness is not music. It is a slow rhythm. But as the moon rose and Ewomazino smiled for the first time in her life, children began to dance in circles. Chief Dolo placed the coral crown on a newly carved wooden stand beside the ancestral drums. "Let it rest here," he said, "to remind us never to cast out what we do not understand." Ewomazino, now dressed in the colors of Asei, took Ibiere's hand and whispered, "You saved them all. One day the sea will call you too." But deep in the sea, Obebelu sat on his throne of tide and salt, holding the naming stone in his hand. He had forgiven. But the sea never forgets. 7 seasons passed. The village of Asei changed in ways even the oldest baobab couldn't remember. Witnessing, fishermen no longer spat into the ocean before casting nets. Children were taught the stories of Ewomazino and Obebelu not as myths, but as living truths. And near the talking tree, a new shrine was built, a sculpture of a girl with a coral crown and a heart shell in her hands. Ewomazino became a woman of both water and land. She lived on the edge of the village in a modest hut, where villagers came to seek wisdom, blessings, or simply sit by her side when storms stirred their minds. Some whispered she never aged. Others said the sea whispered back when she spoke to it, but Ibiere, she grew like flame in dry grass. She became the youngest apprentice priestess the coast had ever known. At 14, she could interpret shell patterns with uncanny accuracy. At 15, she began dreaming in the voice of Obebelu himself. One morning, just before the rains returned, she woke with salt on her eyelids and words carved into her palm. Not with ink, but with light. "Come home." She ran to Ewomazino. "I heard him," she said, "and he called me child." Ewomazino smiled gently. "Then it is time." That evening, the village gathered at the shore once more. This time there was no fear, only reverence. Ibiere was clothed in white, wrapped in sea silk woven by Ewomazino's own hands. Around her head was a smaller crown, woven with baby, corals, and silver sea grass. The waves parted, not violently, but lovingly. Obebelu rose again, but he was different now. Softer. His eyes held pride, not rage. In his arms was a staff carved from a whale's tooth and set with glowing shells. "You, Ibiere," he said, "will be the voice of the tide. Not above them, not below them, but between them." He extended a hand, and Ibiere, without hesitation, stepped into the water. As the waves closed around her ankles, then her knees, the villagers wept, not in sorrow, but in awe. They watched as she walked, slowly, into the embrace of the sea god, until the water shimmered and swallowed her. But she did not disappear. Far in the horizon, where the sun kissed the ocean's lips, a new island rose, a shimmering coral outpost where land met tide. And standing tall at its edge were 2 figures, one with a coral crown and one with a heart shell pulsing in her chest. From that day on, fishermen said they saw them when the waters were still, watching, guarding, guiding. The story of Ewomazino, the girl they threw to the sea, and Ibiere, the girl who listened to the ocean, was no longer a tale of fear. It became the sacred legacy of Asei, and on every naming day children were told, "Be careful how you treat the one you do not understand, for they may one day return wearing a crown of coral,